Before the silence, there was a warning. Before the rain, a judgment. And when the first drops fell, it was already too late. The sky darkened as if in mourning. The clouds gathered like the walls of an invisible army, ready to strike. The air, heavy and damp, carried a tension no soul could explain. A warning lingered in the wind, but almost no one wanted to listen. Men laughed, children ran, wine poured from the jars as they mocked that strange old man who had preached for decades about something they had never seen. Rain. Where is this flood that never comes? They said. But Noah did not waver. His eyes were steady, his faith unshakable. He was building not just an ark, but a testimony. Imagine a world where everyone ignores the danger, where human arrogance shuts its ears to the sound of the approaching thunder. A world like ours, perhaps. What happened back then wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mirror. And then it happened. The ground shook, cracks opened, and from the belly of the earth surged waters like liquid blades, cutting through everything in their path. The sky split open with a cry of judgment. In that moment, all understood. Noah was not mad. He was the last sane one. But the question that still echoes today is disturbing. How did a simple wooden boat withstand the greatest natural disaster in human history? How did the Ark resist forces that destroyed entire continents? And more than that, what does that reveal to us, who still face invisible storms? This video goes beyond explanation. It will take you inside the Ark. It will make you hear the silence, feel the fear, and find, in the midst of darkness, the only thing that remained: faith. The journey you're about to live is more than a story. It is a reminder that judgment is real, but so is salvation. If this message has already stirred something in you, take a deep breath and continue. Don't leave before the end, because what we will reveal here may change the way you see the world and what lies beyond it. And if you feel this kind of content speaks to your soul, subscribe to the channel. Here, each story is a bridge between mystery and truth. Each video is a chance to see the Bible like you never have before. Like this video, share it with someone who needs this truth and join us on this journey. Because today, we won't just tell the story of the flood. We're going to go through it. It wasn't a simple storm. It was the breaking of the foundations of heaven and earth. The clouds didn't just pour down rain. They tore the sky open with fury. In an instant, the entire world seemed to collapse. The sound of the waters pounding the ground was like the drum of a divine army. The flood was not mere rain. It was judgment in liquid form. Deep springs exploded from the soil, spewing rivers of fire and mud. It was as if the very belly of the earth was vomiting its contents. From above, the heavens opened in unending torrents. Mountains were swallowed, cities vanished like sandcastles before a mighty wave. Men screamed, trying to climb rooftops, trees, anything. Women clung to their children weeping, animals ran in desperation. But it was all in vain. The water rose unstoppable, cold, faceless. No one could withstand the sheer force of God's wrath. Meanwhile, inside the ark, silence, no hysteria, no screams. Only the sound of the waters striking the hull and the subtle creaking of wood, firm, like an embrace. Inside, the world breathed through the faith of one man, the faith that saved his household. The faith that still saves those who believe today. The ark didn't float peacefully. It was shaken, tossed, tested, but it didn't sink, it didn't crack, it didn't give way. What seemed like a simple, rugged ship was in truth a floating fortress. And curiously, many modern scholars point out the proportions described in the Bible make the ark surprisingly stable for a raging sea. But Noah didn't know naval engineering. He knew obedience. And sometimes, obeying is safer than understanding. Because those who follow God's commands walk within an eternal design, even if they don't comprehend it all. Outside, the waters devoured everything. Streets became rivers, trees vanished beneath the current. It was a new world being shaped, not by creation, but by judgment. a world rewritten by the same hands that had formed it in the beginning. Inside the ark, all were praying. Noah, his wife, his sons, their wives, all sat in reverent silence. It was as if time had stopped. An entire universe had been reduced to the inside of a wooden hull. Humanity was now a family with one purpose: to survive the greatest storm ever known. For 40 days and 40 nights, the sky gave no rest. 40, the biblical number of transformation, of testing, of new beginnings. Time enough to cleanse, to empty, to prepare the world for a new story. Outside, the world screamed. Inside, hope remained guarded. It was like a spiritual womb where the new humanity was being formed. Noah didn't know how long it would last, but he knew that if God had shut the door of the ark, he would also know when to open it. Because when everything falls apart, when the waters seem endless, it is inside faith that we find shelter. The chaos was not the end. It was the beginning of something not yet seen. And that may be the flood's most powerful lesson, that even destruction, when guided by God's hands, hides a new beginning. With each passing day, the waters seemed to mock hope. There was no pause, no break. Heaven and earth had united in a single roar. The world had become unrecognizable, as if God was painting it anew with brushstrokes of fury and tears. Nature, once a refuge, now devoured without mercy. In every submerged corner, memories sank. Homes, stories, dreams, all taken. Those who once mocked Noah were now crying for help. But the time of mercy had passed. It was as though the raindrops were tears of the Creator himself, mourning a humanity that had rejected him to the end. But the ark, oh, the ark, remained steady. It was more than a shelter. It was a living promise. As the world died outside, a new chance was growing inside. The sound of water beating against the hull was like a drum marking the heartbeat of a world in formation. Inside it, time dragged on. Days blurred together. Light and darkness alternated with the monotony of an unending morning. Yet even so, no one inside lost hope, because where obedience dwells, there is peace, even when all outside is chaos. Ancient cultures also speak of a great flood, from Mesopotamia to India. Many scholars believe that something of global proportions truly shook the earth. But the biblical account is unique in one essential point. There, judgment walks side by side with grace. The heart of the story is not in destruction, but in preservation. The focus is not the tragedy, but the love of a God who offered a way out. The ark is proof that heaven never sends judgment without first preparing a path to salvation. Noah didn't understand the reasons, but he trusted. He didn't build the ark because he had proof. He built it because he had faith. And that faith sustained not only a wooden vessel, it sustained the continuation of human life on earth. On the last of the 40 days, the storm ceased. The heavens no longer wept. The roar of the waters was replaced by a terrifying silence. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was the absence of chaos. But for those inside the ark, it was the first sign that something remained after the judgment. As the vessel drifted over a boundless ocean, Noah looked upward. No land in sight, no certainty, but he knew that the God who had started the journey would also lead it to the end. Because when everything disappears, what remains is the voice that never fails. And so, even when the entire world seemed to be erased, the promise kept floating, upheld by the faith of a man, by the hands of the Creator, and by a hope no storm could ever drown. It wasn't just an ark, it was a survival machine built by the hands of a man and the mind of God. Immense, silent, sacred. The ark floated over a formless world like a divine reliquary guarding what was left of hope. It wasn't a sleek or fast vessel, but it didn't need to be. It wasn't made to sail, it was made to endure. Its dimensions were colossal. About 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, roughly 450 feet by 75 by 45. Proportions that today, surprisingly, are considered ideal for stability in stormy seas, as confirmed by modern naval studies. But Noah didn't read manuals, he simply followed instructions from heaven. 3 decks divided the levels of survival. But more than floors, they were worlds. On the ground level, the pulse of the animals. On the middle deck, provision and life. On the top floor, the human cry rising to heaven. Each part of the ark worked like the organs of a body, alive, breathing, moved by faith. The hull, made of gopher wood and sealed inside and out, was as thick as Noah's faith. The inner beams, strong and heavy, formed not just a structure, but an embrace, a floating womb nurturing a new humanity, a sacred box sailing over chaos. Inside, the darkness was broken only by a single window high and facing the sky. One single gaze upward. Perhaps this detail tells us something profound. God didn't want Noah to look at the waters, but to look up, because salvation doesn't come from what has sunk. It comes from the one above. Noah walked the ark's corridors like a priest within a temple. There was no luxury, no comfort, but there was peace. Every hammer strike given over the years of building now made sense. Every mockery he endured now had meaning. Faithfulness builds invisible shelters that withstand the fiercest storms. The waters roared outside, but inside reigned a serene order. The structure, even under the weight of hundreds of creatures and the pressure of the waves, did not give in. It was as if God's own hands were wrapped around that wood, holding every nail, every beam, every bone of the hull together. And what of the door? God himself shut it, not Noah. This reminds us that some doors in life can only be opened or closed by the Creator. And when he shuts a door, it's for protection. When he opens it, it's for deliverance. The ark was sealed by heaven, and because of that, it could not sink. It's important to remember the ark had no rudder, no sail, no human control. There was no steering toward a destination. And that is profound, because sometimes God doesn't give us direction, only protection. The goal wasn't to navigate, but to survive. The ark was designed to face the unthinkable. It was a symbol of divine resistance in the face of human collapse. While the waters tried to wipe everything out, floating there was the plan of redemption. Not merely wood on water, but faith over judgment. This vessel was the link between two worlds, the one that was destroyed and the one that was to be born. It was the umbilical cord between justice and mercy, a refuge crafted by human hands, yet guided by the breath of God. And even though they didn't know how long it would last, one truth remained. The ark was not made to sail, it was made to endure. While the world sank, life quietly reorganized itself. Inside the ark, chaos gave way to order. It wasn't a wild zoo. It was more like a silent assembly of creation. Predators lay beside prey without violence. Younglings, calm. Rival species at peace, as if the invisible hand of the Creator touched each instinct and bent it toward obedience. There were no screams, no deafening roars. There was a different sound, almost reverent, like that of a living temple. All creation seemed to know it was being protected, not just from the waters, but from itself. In that moment, instinct bowed to purpose. The species were led by God into the ark, and there they remained under an order that transcended nature. Lions rested beside deer, serpents slithered without threat. For a time, nature returned to Eden. For 370 days, creation lived as in the beginning, obedient, harmonious, whole. The ark's decks were not cold storage rooms for life. They were corridors of resurrection. Every animal, every bird, every insect, they were seeds of the future. They weren't there just to survive, they were there to begin again, as if the Creator had kept each species the way one guards a promise. Food was simple but sufficient, just what was needed, nothing more. The essential sustained everyone. That too was part of the lesson. In times of judgment, there's no room for excess, only for provision, and what came from God's hand was never lacking. The human-animal interaction was quietly respectful. Noah's sons tended the corridors like gardeners of a world yet to come. Their wives helped manage supplies. Every task was a prayer, every act a way of saying, "We are alive. There is still hope." It was dark, cramped, without a horizon, but inside the ark there was something the world had lost: peace. Because even without knowing how long it would last, everyone there knew who they were with, and that made all the difference between the death outside and the life within. Creation didn't survive by chance. It survived by design, by choice, by purpose, and that changes everything. Because it wasn't a fluke of nature. It was an intentional act of mercy. A re-engineering of the world, not through total destruction, but through selective preservation. The ark wasn't just a shelter, it was a moving altar, a mobile sanctuary where God placed the continuation of life. Every heartbeat within that wood was like the pulse of the Creator himself saying, "I'm not finished yet." And so, day after day, life continued inside the hull, not with haste, not with fear, but with reverence. Waiting for the moment when the sky would open again, not with rain, but with light. What happens to the mind when everything you once knew is destroyed? Out there the world screamed, or what was left of it. Mountains once majestic vanished beneath the waters. Ancient trees were torn up like fragile weeds. Entire cities were swallowed by liquid silence. The horizon had become nothing more than a grey shroud, shapeless, directionless. For those inside the ark, the sound from outside was like a distant echo of a nightmare. They couldn't see what was happening, but they could feel it. The groan of the wood, the crashing waves, the trembling hull. Every noise reminded them that destruction was still alive, still present, and with it came anguish. Though protected, their hearts were not untouched. There was fear, longing, confusion. Time dragged on, and the total lack of control created a quiet anxiety. The nights felt endless, the darkness eternal, and God's silence deafening. Noah heard no further instructions. The last command had been, "Enter the ark." After that, the heavens went quiet. And there is no solitude deeper than the one we feel when God goes silent. Yet even in that silence, Noah's faith stood firm, because true faith does not depend on answers, only on presence. Inside the ark, the sounds became familiar. The steps of the animals, the sway of the structure, the breathing of the people. But outside, the world was falling apart. Imagine knowing that everything you once knew was gone. That your friends, neighbors, places had vanished. The human mind was not made to endure this kind of loss. It was a collective mourning, deep, silent. Each day was an endless funeral, and yet life remained. And as long as life remained, so did the promise. That was Noah's anchor, not the ground, but hope. The sound of judgment became part of the routine, but there was something even more deafening. The silence of what came next, the absolute void of what was to be. No birds, no rustling leaves, no voices. The world was on pause, as if God were taking a breath before beginning again. And it is in that moment that faith reveals its true strength, not when everything makes sense, but when everything is dark. Noah's faith wasn't built on guarantees. It was built on the memory of who God is. Even without seeing land, he trusted. Even without answers, he endured. Each person inside the ark faced that darkness in their own way. But there was one thing they all shared: obedience. They were there because they believed. And even without knowing what would come next, they understood that outside the ark, there was nothing left. It wasn't just a journey of survival. It was a process of rebirth. And like every birth, it came with pain, with darkness, with uncertainty, but also with the certainty that on the other side of the pain, something new would rise, because the hell outside didn't completely consume them, only because inside them still burned a flame, the certainty that God had not forgotten them. When everything seemed endless, the wind blew. It wasn't a storm, It wasn't a furious gust. It was a breath, almost imperceptible, but full of promise. The same God who had shut the heavens now stirred the air over the waters. A subtle gesture, yet powerful, the beginning of a new era. Mercy began with a breeze. The waters began to recede, slowly, not in haste, but with purpose. The currents no longer struck with the same violence. The sound outside changed. The flood was retreating, and with it the shadows. The world was being unveiled, inch by inch, like a wound slowly healing. Inside, Noah's eyes turned to the window. That same single opening facing upward now received light. A gentle ray pierced the darkness. It wasn't just sunlight, it was grace. It was heaven saying, "I am still here," not with words, but with light. After 40 days and 40 nights the rain stopped, but the waters still covered everything. The sky remained silent, the earth unseen. Months passed since the last thunder faded, and still the ark floated, waiting. Time inside the hull was suspended, days, weeks, months. In total, 370 days. Throughout it all, Noah remained in the ark until the ground was dry, and God commanded him to leave. Genesis 8:15-16. And then, after months of silence and darkness, Noah sensed the time had come. He opened the window. The air that rushed in smelled new, like a freshly washed world. There was no scent of smoke, no scent of death. It was the fragrance of hope, a scent only those who have passed through judgment can recognize. He then released a raven. It flew but did not return. Later, a dove. And when it came back, carrying an olive branch in its beak, Noah's heart nearly stopped. It wasn't just a twig, it was an answer. A confirmation that life had begun to bloom again. God had not yet spoken, but every movement in creation shouted the message, "It's beginning again." It was as if the world, after a long mourning, began to breathe once more. Every droplet that evaporated from the waters carried with it the pain of the past, making room for rebirth. And then, on a certain day, the ark touched ground. Mount Ararat received it like an altar. There was no celebration, no trumpets, but there was reverence. The feet of those who stepped out touched the ground with awe. They were the first humans to walk on a rebuilt world. Noah didn't rush. He didn't shout. He built an altar. The first thing he did upon leaving the ark was worship. He didn't just give thanks for survival. He gave thanks for the privilege of beginning again. And that act sealed something profound. Salvation is not the end. It's the start of a new covenant. God looked upon Noah, and he made a promise. Never again would he destroy the world with water. Never again would he wipe everything away. And that never again still echoes today, because when God chooses to preserve, he also chooses to restore. The flood wasn't the end. It was a rescue, a chance to do it all differently. The ark didn't just save bodies, it saved promises. It preserved God's purpose for humanity. It carried the thread of redemption that would run all the way to the cross. It saved faith, the kind that walks even in darkness, that waits even in silence, and that endures until the wind blows again. And then, God painted a vow across the sky. It wasn't just an optical phenomenon, it was a sign. A multicolored arc, curved as if the sky itself were bowing in reverence. The rainbow appeared as a bridge between the divine and the human, between judgment and grace, between a drowned past and a restored future. For Noah and his family, that sign wasn't just beautiful, it was the voice of God speaking again. After so much silence, now there was a covenant, a promise not written on stone tablets, but in light and color, suspended over a world washed by repentance and sealed with forgiveness. God said, "I establish my covenant with you. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." Genesis 9:11. And he sealed that promise with the rainbow, an eternal reminder that even when the skies grow dark, mercy will always prevail over judgment. The rainbow became more than a natural symbol. It became memory, Every time the heavens threatened rain again, that sign would remind humanity that God does not forget, that he does not go back on his word, that behind every storm, there is a covenant. In that moment, something more happened. The covenant wasn't just with Noah, it was with all creation. Animals, birds, the earth, the sky, all were included. A universal covenant of redemption. And that reminds us, God's plan was never to destroy, but to restore all that he loves. Judgment had passed, the ark had come to rest. Life was beginning again, but the bow in the sky remained as a silent question. And you, are you inside the ark or outside of it? Because true salvation isn't found in wood or dimensions. It's found in where we place our trust when the waters begin to rise. The rainbow is beautiful to all, but it is a sign of covenant only to those who recognize its origin. For those who see with eyes of faith, it is more than refracted light. It is the signature of God, a living reminder that he not only judges, he saves, he promises, and he fulfills. Maybe the ark is no longer on Ararat, maybe the winds consumed it, the wood decayed, or the earth hid it forever, but it's still alive. Not as a structure, but as a symbol. Inside every person who chooses to obey. The ark was built with wood, but it was upheld by faith, and that faith still floats in the hearts of those who amid life's storms choose to trust God even when they don't hear his voice, even when everything feels dark and groundless. Today the floods are different. They don't fall from the sky. They come from pressures, pain, fears, and sins that try to drown us daily. And once again, God offers a refuge, not one built by human hands, but one built on eternal promises. Christ is the new ark, and everyone who enters through him lives. You may not see rain on the outside, but inside, you know when you're sinking. That's why today this story doesn't end with Noah. It continues with you. Because the question that has echoed since the first thunder still remains, are you inside the ark or outside? If this message touched your soul, leave your testimony. Comment, I am inside. Share this truth with someone you love. Like this video. And if you're not yet part of this channel, subscribe now, because here, every story brings you closer to the heart of God. The ark was a refuge, but it was also an altar. And today, heaven is still searching for hearts where it can dwell. Build your faith, and God will take care of the rest.